well-being, mental well-being concepts, and merging them together actually gives us a much deeper access to flow, in my understanding. But before coming there, I would love to ask you actually. So you said you already like kind of gave an introduction to what flow means to you, but so how would you describe this flow show up mostly in your life? And if you could describe it with one sentence, like if you could define it with one sentence based on your subjective experience, what definition would you give to it?
In one sentence, I would say flow is when everything is working perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
The next sentence would be there's absolute clarity
Mm-hmm.
and there is no thought. There's
Mm-hmm.
just an experience. You're just doing something at the highest level of your capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
The official definition is more, has to do with the level of consciousness. So flow
Mm-hmm.
is the optimal state of consciousness in which you are, bodiless, you are timeless, and you are performing at your best and your highest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to ask you now, thinking of flow, and I think everybody can relate to flow,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like everybody I ask, I'm studying for flow and I'm training in flow and flow, everybody's like, flow? Of course, everybody knows flow. Like, why would you study it?
Mm-hmm.
And so my question to you is now that, we understand that flow is this whole other level of human performance and human capability, when you think of flow proneness and flow
Mm-hmm.
framework,
Mm-hmm.
how can we bring it down? How do you bring it down and simplify it into your everyday life and into your client's life?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, what would a flow framework look like for you in simple terms?
Mm-hmm. So now I love this question, but the first thing which I would do is I would love to zoom out and just like have a general perspective on life, specifically in nowadays century, right? The way how we live as humans, and the way also how we try to make sense of our own lives, the way how we try to make sense of everything that happens, what we call life and what we call experience. And zooming out, like flow, how I see it is, in my understanding, it's a tool. That's how I see it. Like flow is a tool, and it's a tool that I use in order to create something. So that's how I like to use it. Like I know, okay, if I want to create something, and you just termed the you just use the word perfection, like flows for your perfection or seamlessly functioning in something. Like if I want to create something in that regard, for example, regarding my work or having like an experience within my personal martial arts journey, I like to hack specific uh, conditions that allow me to dive into flow and make this experience as seamless as possible, and also for me to create the best possible outcome. So having that said, it's like an isolated tool, but it doesn't make, for me, it is not the ultimate goal of life itself, even though very often it is termed like that, because for me, um, uh, life goes beyond flow, and just flow is something which we can use in life to make it more enjoyable. We can use it in life to create stuff, to play around, and to do our work better without burning out, and actually improve the living standards that we're experiencing today. So that having said, um, or before I go on further, was it clear what I mean by that?
Yeah,
Yes?
I, I,
Okay,
I
good.
love I love the simple analogy. Flow is a tool.
Yes, exactly. So, and if I have a tool, and as already said before, since flow is something which we experience so personally, if I have a tool, I have to find a way how to make this tool work for me personally, like work with regard to the way how my neurobiology is shaped, the way how I live my life, the way how my environment is shaped. So the way how everything around me is actually the way how everything around me is shaped, and the way how I function. And having a framework is actually something that allows me to dive into flow, giving the conditions that I'm living in. And before I share um, what my framework looks like. You asked me also, like, how do I actualize that in the work with my clients? And in the work with my clients, I use it specifically when they are actually on like when they are on the performance side of their lives and they want to improve that, or they want to see how can I actually improve my work experience without burning out? How can I actually find deeper meaning in the things that I'm doing on a daily basis, specifically work related? Then I look with them at the aspects like what does their environment look like, how can they actually prime their physiology the best way possible, how can they prime their mental states best way possible, and how do they get the necessary clarity that allows them to dive into flow, and actually with them working on their own personal flow framework. And I'm just using my way of making sense of life and making sense of flow and trying to refer to my clients and just like asking questions that help them actually to reflect in a way to make flow more happening in their lives.
Yeah,
That's it. Mhm. Exactly,
that's
yes.
really interesting. So when you say flow proneness, I'm
hmm
curious, what does that mean for you, and what does that look like for you?
hmm hmm Um, so I think for that, of course, since we both know a lot about it, and we have studied it now in the past month or past year, let's term it like this, what flow in general is. So as far as I understand, and also regarding the science and the literature, primed by Stephen Kotler and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, as far as I understood it, and also as far as I make sense out of flow, is that there's specific pillars that need to be in place so that flow can actually be happening in your life. And these are four specific pillars. And the first one is actually distraction management, which means like to get out all distraction that distract you from a specific task that you want to do and where you want to dive into flow so that you have a seamless environment. And on the one side and on the other side, also reducing your cognitive load, for example, which means like I do that by writing down what are things that are upsetting me today, what are things that are laying in my belly or are stuck in my throat. So I try to put them into paper in order to really decrease that mental load and allowing me to focus on the one thing possible. So that's the distraction management part. The next part are flow triggers, which are as it already said, triggers that allow us to dive easier into flow. I think the biggest flow trigger for me, which I experience, and that's also thanks to you, since I'm part of your coaching program, is knowing what am I doing it for, and also knowing specifically the why behind my actions, which means like why am I working on specifically that, and what is the deeper link that I have. So what's the purpose behind my work? And it's just like thinking about something that is purposeful for me and linking it to all this experience that is so joyful for me is a flow trigger in itself. And other flow triggers that we also know by literature are, for example, perceived risk, a specific perceived risk by the skill challenge balance, which means like, for example, us right now going live, which means like there's a specific risk of that we are putting ourselves in, right? Being the possibility of being judged by other people, for example. And so these are known as flow triggers. Now we're coming to the next pillar, which is the flow proneness. And flow proneness, as far as I understand it, is actually in how far is your organism, your human organism, actually prone to dive into flow, which means like how susceptible is your organism to flow. And this is something which we can train. So since our brain is plastic and also like our nervous system is adaptable, we have the possibility to train our neurobiology to dive easier into flow. And I think that's also where probably most of the flow, where most of the science around, like how can we actually prime humans to go easier into flow and actually to make performance more seamless, less stressful, and also more enjoyable. Now, since you listened to my explanation of flow proneness, does it make sense to you, or do you think it makes sense to people who listen to that?
Yeah, so the word proneness is interesting. And what it brings to my mind is what Stephen Kotler always says, make your biology work for you. So
hmm
Stephen Kotler has basically brought this work of flow neuroscience to the forefront. He's been studying it and researching it for the last 30 years. And his key motto in his whole approach is really learning the biology, because he believes that biology trumps the psychology, the psyche, that our mental processes are actually kind of overridden by our physical instincts, by our biological instincts. And there's a lot of discussion around that. There's different schools of thought about, how much does it trump, in which cases, and it trumps it, in which cases it doesn't. But I think that when it comes to the flow neuroscience, what the science is saying, what it's showing, and what is being called the flow proneness, what brings to mind when I think of flow proneness is, how do you make your biology work for you to be the most flow ready, and to have flow in your day as much as possible. And so for me, flow proneness is like, first of all, your biology. What is your biology? Are you a male? Are you a female? What is your chronotype, which is your 24-hour circadian rhythm chronobiology? So as humans, we all have the same circadian rhythm, 24-hour biology, but there's quite a few studies on chronobiology. I like to cite the work of the sleep doctor, Dr. Michael Breus, who actually defines 4 different chronotypes. And, they are like the early risers and the late risers. And in between is most of society, most people. And, those are the people who wake and rise, who wake and go to sleep with the sun cycle. So what does that mean is that during the 24 hours, your body is doing different things. So you want to find the time when your body is more primed to be in flow. And, it starts with your brainwave state. And your brainwave state, goes through these different frequencies from when you are in sleep, the delta, the theta as you're waking up, into alpha. So between theta and alpha brainwave state is when your brain is most primed for being in a flow state. And when are those times? When are those times naturally occurring in your life? Well, they're mostly occurring when, you're waking up, when you're going to sleep, and somewhere during the day. So depending on your chronotype, that hour might be a little bit different for most people. So the early risers, those are people that'll wake up at like 4 or 5 a.m. naturally. So their flow proneness, their most natural flow proneness is like in those first 2 to 3 hours in the morning. And for people who wake up a little bit later, it's the same. Our flow proneness is within the first 2-3 hours of awakening. However, if we are the later risers, then that window might be a little bit shorter, because, until noon, you still have a lot of other things to kind of take care of. But in principle, flow proneness to me, fundamentally, because there's many layers to it, but fundamentally, it means getting to know your body, getting to know when your body is physically, ready for a flow state, and then creating a schedule and creating a life and a framework around your prime time. So when is your prime time for flow? And then you organize your life around your prime time. You don't give your prime time away. You save, you conserve, and you create a whole framework around your prime time, basically.
I like that. That's really clear. I really love it. So I have a question, and this might be maybe even a question that we both could contemplate on, but like taking what you said just into consideration. And to anyone who is listening right now, we will still come to the 4th pillar of flow, because right now we are stuck on the 3rd one, which is the flow proneness. So we're still coming to the 4th one. But just giving like what you said is, so what would be your advice to people, for example, who, due to external circumstance, like having kids or whatever it is, or having like a preset work schedule, who cannot leverage their chronotypes optimally to actually access flow or to be as prone as possible to their personal flow states, what would your advice be to them?
That's a really good question, because as you expand your family and your lifestyle, the more people that are involved in your life, the more complex uh, arranging chronobiologies becomes. There is still a way, even though different people will have different chronobiologies within the same family, there are still ways that you can create your personal flow time, your
Mm-hmm.
personal flow proneness, and your group flow proneness.
Mm-hmm.
So we're calling it group flow or team flow, because that's kind of the terminology. But the idea is there's personal flow, and then we also get into flow when we are in a community of people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's ways that you can prime for family flow, let's say, times. And I would say that the one way to do that is for everybody to become clear on their own personal prime time.
Mm-hmm.
When is their prime time for high level work, for creative work, for social time, or meeting time?
Mm-hmm.
And so I always kind of start with the basics, which is what is your non-negotiables?
Mm-hmm.
For example, the first one is sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to go to sleep during this hour. So that's non-negotiable,
Mm-hmm.
or at least the non-negotiables that, we claim.
Mm-hmm.
So you start with your non-negotiables, your sleep, your meal times, your workout, your active recovery, and then you add into your non-negotiable anything that is absolutely non-negotiable for you. So in a family, prime time flow state for you, I believe, is just as important to be in a non-negotiable, because it has to do with your level of well-being beyond your performance.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about flow for peak performance and productivity, but overall flow creates a very deep state of well-being,
Mm-hmm.
so that while you're performing and working, which is an exertion, you can also feel really well, and that will sustain and therefore will create even continuous well-being in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So to that degree, then I believe that identifying each person in the family, identifying their non-negotiables and their prime time, and then you create a grid, and then you start seeing where they intersect naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start picking on the things that maybe are a little bit different for everyone, and you make kind of agreements. So one day a week, everybody, kind of meets in this one time for this one particular activity, which could be house cleaning, or it could be, I don't know, a game night, or right. So any activity that is a chore or that is, a social time, then you can have an agreement for which days of the week everybody will agree that this will be the, this time for the
Mm-hmm.
family.
Mm-hmm.
So those
Mm-hmm.
are kind of some of my top, I guess, thoughts on
Mm-hmm.
creating flow proneness in a unit, in a
Mm-hmm.
community, in a group
Mm-hmm.
unit, in a family
Mm-hmm.
unit,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of goes the same for work unit as well.
Mm-hmm. Makes absolutely sense. Makes sense. I understand very good. Um, for me, also, one thing that just came up was just to add on that is, I imagine, for example, even families who just have a child right now, for example, I know like my ex-girlfriend, she like who I'm still very good befriended with, she just recently became a mom,
Mm,
and she told me, well, it starts with like having 3 hours of sleep per night, right? And like your whole rhythm actually is completely scattered and so different from what you were doing before. And therefore, I ask myself also like if there's some kind of priorities that you set, which means like, for example, sacrificing a specific amount of flow proneness, etc., and saying, okay, I'm gonna set my priority in taking care of my child, even though I'm very tired, even though my cognitive load is high. or even though like my allostatic load is high. Allostatic load means the amount of stress hormones we carry within our body, and trying to find a way of prioritizing when it's time for what. Like that was just something that was going through my mind, like making kind of trade-offs that are value-based, and then still finding maybe some kind of window in the day when you're still working where maybe your pronus is still the highest, or where you can actually train your pros to be higher. And I think there's also ways of training your pronus, for example. But yes, before I continue on that one, what is your thoughts around that?
Yeah, my thoughts are that priorities definitely change throughout a human's life. So we're
Hmm.
constantly changing. Life is just one journey of cycles, and we're
Hmm.
cycling through different phases of our lives. So our flow proneness might change depending on the priorities that we have in the moment.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
like when you're on vacation, you know, you can take 6 months off, for example, if you really want to do a long process of maybe reinventing yourself or reinventing a new project. Or so in that sense, there is a particular phase in which you are in, and so you will adjust your whole flow framework. Since we,
Hmm.
you know, the main idea here of this topic conversation is how to create a flow framework, or what is a flow framework. And I think that that framework adjusts as your priorities change, but there are some, you know, foundations that are always the same.
Hmm.
So your body will always be flow prone in particular times of the day, uh,
Hmm.
uh, depending on your current, you know, family state. So being a new mother, having a newborn, that is clearly the priority. And
Hmm.
you know, they say that a woman's body adapts and changes to the rhythms of the child. So in
Hmm.
the first 3 years of the child, the mother's body is completely synchronized with the child's body. So
Hmm. Hmm.
the priority there is very clear. You are you know, you have different flow proneness based on when your child is, you know, going to its own flow state, which is basically
Hmm.
after it's fed and
Hmm.
cleaned and
Hmm.
ready to play or to sleep.
Hmm. Hmm. I understand. Very interesting. It's a very interesting perspective. I even ask myself, for example, um, since like I mentioned before when we were talking about flow triggers, for me, one is meaning, like really purpose, like having a purpose, a deeper purpose, which can drive us directly, which is really for me, it can drive me directly into flow once I'm busy with something that is purposeful for me. And this could be even at night at an hour where I'm actually normally would be sleeping, but I'm having like a deep conversation with a friend about a subject that I really care about, right? So suddenly I think these are all some kind of flow states we engage in. And probably what I'm guessing, and I'm just really making here a very, very courageous guess here, probably maybe the same counts for a parent that just gets up at night and takes care of their child and say, okay, this is actually my purpose right now. That's actually that goes beyond my selfish um, drive for survival, or my selfish drive for passion, or my selfish drive for performance in that regard, right? Or work performance, whatever it is that goes beyond us. Yes. Hmm.
Yeah, it makes
Um,
sense. It's kind of similar when we get involved with a project, let's say.
hmm.
So when a mother has a child, it seems pretty clear that they enter a zone. They enter
Hmm.
like a state
Hmm.
where they come together in that, you know, whereas a child is in like a complete theta brainwave state for the first 7 years of its life,
Hmm.
you know, the mother in many ways aligns and adjusts to that energy, to that, you know, brain frequency. And so their flow is very similar, very different. So it seems like a natural process.
Hmm.
And kind of the same thing happens when we birth other things, when we birth a new relationship, be that romantic or social, when we birth a new project, our state of being kind of changes. There is this excitement, there is something brewing, there's something happening that kind
Hmm.
of takes up all that focus.
Hmm.
And writers talk about this. Stephen Kotler talks about this, you know, in basically when you're writing a book, that's it. This is your focus. This is your priority. This is your you and you in train with it. It's not like you make an effort. You naturally get into a framework for flow that naturally takes you there because you are naturally birthing something that is coming out of you. So in that sense, I think that it's, if you don't resist it, if you're not in some turmoil or burnout, when you do understand how to set up a flow framework for life, then you will naturally find your flow proneness in whatever your current you know, project or lifestyle is requiring of you or is inspiring you to go towards.
Makes very much sense. I love that. I love this analogy. Yes. Makes very, very much sense. And for me, actually, just to go on quicker also to like the main subject about flow proneness, actually to discover and talk a little bit about the fourth pillar of flow, which is the flow cycle itself, which again is like a four-step process. And there's even like new perspectives around it that these four steps do not need to happen exactly in this order, but we'll just go on in the order that we've learned them and also that we know they go, and the order that's actually described in literature until so far, which is the first phase, the struggle phase, where we're actually busy with something and we need a lot of cognitive friction to get a grasp of something, be it like, for example, working on a new project or like you said, writing a book, writing the first paragraph, developing a slideshow, whatever it is, right? So at first we need to get our head around something. And the next phase is actually the so-called release phase, which is where we take a short step away of the program. Once we feel, okay, now it's really getting there's like really a very high cognitive load right now. And we just take a step away from the problem, which is called the release phase. The step away can be anything that destimulates us from the task that we're busy with, and where we engage into a kind of low stimulus activity, which is not something such as screen time or I don't know, watching a movie, or I wouldn't even probably listen to a podcast or something. That's something which I would not do, but rather really something where we engage and calm our own neurobiology, which would be a breathing exercise, or having a walk around the block, or maybe a small conversation with someone, which is like just a release conversation, maybe talking about something which is stressing us, or maybe even talking about the problem itself, and then or writing it out. And this release phase can take a different amount of time. To my experience, in my personal experience, it's like always between 5 and 20 minutes. That's like just how I experienced it. And then afterwards, there's the flow part, which is the third part of the cycle, where we actually dive into flow, and it's also where actually our neurobiology really shoots all the neurochemistry into our brain and into our system, which are responsible for flow. Maybe later on we can just recap all the hormones, or like all the hormones that are engaging into our system in that state. And as you said, the flow state itself is a state where we feel there's a loss of feeling of ourselves. We engage completely with the activity. There's the seamlessly happening of things, like everything makes sense, and we make extremely good, extremely clear and how do you say it? Like extremely clear. Now my English left me alone, but this doesn't matter. Not
Yeah,
decisions, but like we make sense out of things, and it
yeah,
happens very easily, right?
yeah,
Exactly. That's kind of, and this can be either happening in a work environment where you're like really cognitive challenged, or like in a sports environment. Of course, there's also a cognitive challenge, but also a physiological challenge, and it's like the seamless effort or effortless performance, and our productivity skyrockets. And there's studies from McKinsey which says that our productivity skyrockets up until 400 or even 500%, which means we are 5 times as productive as we would be in a non-flow state. which of course
mm,
allows us to save a lot of time if we know how to hack that on a daily basis. And
mm,
then the last phase is the so-called active recovery, or the recovery phase, where we actually need to recover because it has been so engaging for our system, where we need to decrease our allostatic load, so we build down all the stress hormones and everything else. In the active recovery is everything that helps us actually to regulate our nervous system and re-engage our parasympathetic part of the nervous system, which can be do deep breathing, um, yoga, movement, sauna, writing, reading, everything that kind of calms our system down without engaging into a very high stimulus environment, like, for example, watching something on Netflix or
mm,
scrolling through social media, which are like always the generic examples, but these kind of things. Yes,
mm.
so these four aspects are the flow cycle. Would you add something to that?
The flow cycle is a very interesting it's a very interesting understanding of how flow is coming into our lives. So I
Mhm.
like your analogy. I like your description. Everything makes perfect sense. Um, like it starts with a struggle. Everything starts with a struggle. So, and this was, I think, a big one for me because we're always trying to, get rid of the struggle. In what way? Mainly we're trying to distract. If it's too hard, if it's not working, if something is not flowing, then we immediately go to social media, or we'll have something to eat, or we'll get on the
Mhm.
phone with someone because we think this is the good thing to do. It's a good thing to step away from the struggle. But what we're doing wrong, and I want to loop back to the last phase of the flow cycle, which is the recovery piece, that because this is like a 4 cycle thing, but it's constantly kind of looping with each other. And I will want to link it to the fact that when we start with a struggle, if we want to get into the flow state, we have to push through the struggle. And if we're going to break for a moment because the struggle is just not working, then you definitely want to do something like a very low calming active recovery, meaning a low dopamine stimulus kind of activity. So, like you said, breath work, meditation, yoga, and stay away from high stimulating things because then it will be even harder to get into flow. So, that's the one thing I wanted to add about the struggle
Mhm.
because we all fall into that trap. And I didn't know I was doing this for so many years. And I think even really high performing CEOs and executives, we just don't know this. We don't really know that all of this, what we think are normal activities, like getting on a phone or just checking an email, is actually producing a lot of dopamine, and therefore is it's kind of like making our dopamine receptors for flow for this particular topic that we're struggling with, it's making it even harder to get into. And then when it comes to the second phase, which is release, which is the release is kind of like the active recovery. And the way I experience it, for me, it's like if I'm in a struggle and I want to get into flow, and I'm struggling because probably what I'm trying to do is either too hard or I'm just not in my prime time for flow. The release phase for me is like, okay, take this, what we call the boring breaks, which,
Mhm.
kind of links to the same activities as active recovery, even though it's not recovery yet, is just a break, which means it's a
Mhm.
shorter time. Like you said, it's, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, maximum half hour. And I think one of the best releases is probably like taking a walk in nature with no phone or nothing, because that will really just maybe reset or just, reset a little bit of that struggle that you're going through. And then when you get into flow, well, you said it all. And when it comes to active recovery, so I wanted to say something about the release phase that there is some information on the fact that you can also just go straight into flow. That you
Mhm.
don't necessarily need the release. You may need the release if the struggle is too hard and you're not breaking into flow. But there are instances when you can go right into flow from the struggle phase. And that's usually when everything is really, when your flow framework is really well oiled,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You have your
Mhm.
flow framework really nice, you know your prime time, you have your triggers, you have your whole life set up for a flow life, then very likely you can go directly from struggle to flow.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then the active recovery piece is just mind blowing for me. It was one of the biggest realizations when it came to understanding how to create a framework for flow in my life. Was like active recovery was like the big stone, because you want flow, half of it is the recovery piece. And
Mm-hmm.
for people who are in sportsmanship and who train hard, I guess this is common knowledge. I wasn't such a big trainer, so it wasn't so common knowledge to me that you really build strength during active recovery, because
Mm-hmm.
during your workout, you're literally weakening the body. You're breaking muscles, you're breaking tissue, you're
Mm-hmm.
literally breaking the body.
Mm-hmm.
And the real resilience, the real strength is coming after the actual workout. And it's kind of the same thing with flow. In flow, you're just flying high, you're super productive, everything is just happening seamlessly. And it's so energy consuming that after flow, you feel so high, you think like, oh, I don't need anything. But in truth, if you want to have that state again and even better next time, you need to recover all of that, because that's all chemistry that's happened in the body, and it's literal energy that is being expelled. So your body, our body is a finite um, physical organism.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
active recovery piece was a huge difference in my life, and uh, how to create a framework for flow that is that I can enter into flow on a regular basis, and not just when I'm excited about something and when I'm inspired with something. And it reminds me of a saying that, like, amateurs, they will get into flow when they're doing something that they love, and when they're really
Mm-hmm.
like high on whatever it is that they're doing. But real professionals will get into flow when it's necessary, when
Mm-hmm.
they set the time for flow, and when they have created a framework for flow. I'm
Mm-hmm.
adding some words around here, but the concept is that we're all amateurs when we're just falling into flow, and when we do things that are flowy. But the
Mm-hmm.
real training, the real growth, for me, the real vision of all of this work is to be able to train yourself to bring that which is trivial and fun and a hobby like of an experience, or a vacation like of an experience, how to bring that in real life. And so when you describe the flow cycle, like, those are the four pillars of understanding how flow works. And for me, the active recovery piece was like the 50% of it. And when you get this, framework kind of locked down, your own framework locked down, then I think um, that is when you really like bring mastery to your everyday life, and you make your life a vacation. Like, that was
Excellent.
one thing that I really struggled in my corporate career. I
Mm-hmm.
always loved going on vacation, and then I was always tired, and I thought, well, why can't my life be a vacation? Why does a vacation always have to be something outside of everyday life? And so I think working with flow and in flow, I really feel like my life is the vacation,
Mm-hmm.
because I can flow during work. I don't have to just flow when I'm on vacation and when I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
something, fun. I can flow at any time.
Mm-hmm. 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 And the most when you're in your chronotype zone.
Especially when I flow with my
Yes.
chronotype. Yeah,
Nice. Nice. I love it. I love it. Actually,
for
I would love
sure.
to. I think that's such a great overlap to what you said to actually to the importance of a flow framework, as you already said it, right? And what I would like to add is what I believe is that specifically the active recovery part is one of the, like, next to the release part, the active recovery part is one of the things that most of the professionals nowadays, and be it professionals in work environment, like really in the workforce, or professionals in sports, actually miss, and which is actually what leads to burnout, which is what leads to injuries, which is to what leads to even like mental decay, to my understanding. is the fact that we're constantly in the performance grinding zone, but actually really not seeing the importance of active recovery and the importance of doing something that is absolutely not work related, like really setting this harsh border and saying, okay, now work is stopped. That's why actually, for example, Reinders from the Flow Research Collective, former CEO of the Flow Research Collective, talked about like the hard start and finish lines of work, where you actually get out of work and you stop doing whatever you do. You give yourself the possibility to recover. You give yourself the possibility to forget and leverage also what is called the so-called incubation phase in your brain, which allows your default mode network, like your subconscious drive for rumination, to solve things without you actually constantly thinking about it. And that is also one thing that allows us then on the next time to dive better into flow and also to
Mm.
come up with more creative solutions. Now, would you like to add something to that?
Well, I would like to say that it's been officially 45 minutes that we have been on this
Yes.
call, even though the first few minutes we were trying to figure out the tech, which I hope it has worked seamlessly.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say for the next 5 minutes, let's just give this talk one practical tip that, you and I and everyone else listening to this talk, what is one practical tip on the flow framework, on building
Mm-hmm.
a life flow framework or flow
Mm-hmm.
framework life?
Mm-hmm.
What would be one tip that you would that's a kind of like on top of your list, and then I will give mine.
Absolutely. So, what I would do is I would actually share how I create my own flow framework, and then I would leave the tip by what of what I have said resonated with the people who are either listening right now or will be listening in the future. So this would be my personal tip that I would give. And so, as I said in the beginning, I consider flow like a tool in life which allows us to achieve things better without burning out. And I realized for what I need when I go into flow is first of all, I need the direction, which means like I need to have some kind of direction, some kind of purpose where I want to direct my flow and my performance towards to. So I get very clear on what is my purpose on what I'm doing, or how we call it, like how it's called massive transformative purpose as also like part of your coaching program. Um, uh, and having this clear direction of knowing, okay, what is the essential thing that I want to achieve right now? And how does it bring me towards my goals, right?
Mm.
That's the first thing. So once I'm clear on that, then actually I go and try to leverage the flow cycle that we've been talking about and try to leverage with a specific framework. And what I like to do is I like to set up at first an essential task or a goal for the work that I want to do. Specifically, right now for me, since I'm creating a program that would be like, okay, I want to now develop, for example, a specific part of my transformation map for clients, right? Where I combine different neurobiology aspects with uh, with psychotherapeutical methods. And once I have this essential task or goal, what I do is I give it a time block. And I think something that's essential for me is my brain really likes to think very divergent. So I like to really make sense out of very far laying points from each other and try to like find the overlaps between them. So I think that's also like one of the core aspects of being very highly creative. My brain likes to think very highly creative. So I give myself a time block, and if I know I have a task which requires me a lot of creativity, I like to set a time block between 90 minutes and 180 minutes, which allows me actually to step back from the problem as far as I want to, come back to it as far as I want to. And if it's a task which is more structurally based, I mainly take between 30 and 90 minutes. So that's for like really tasks where I'm like really structured and use more of convergent thinking. Exactly. And once I've set up my time block, um, uh, I like to go and engage to it, and of course be very clear on what's the reward that I want to have at the end of the time block. So what is it that I want to have achieved? And I want to have this achievement linked to my personal purpose, to my personal meaning. So in that regard, for example, helping people, as we already said, helping people and really helping people to enjoy and create as much as possible in their personal lives, which is very generic right now, but but it will become more specific. And in that regard, also after having that, so one other aspect that I like to reset, I like to set my environment in such a way that I can always when I step back from the problem, I have tools and technology around me that allows me to reset and recover. And for example, I have a little barbell and I have a little board where I have to balance. And what I really like to do is like to do some balance activities before, or like either before and before I engage into the task, and also in my little breaks, which allows me to really step back from the problem, be engaged into something completely else, and doing something that is also fun for me. Exactly. Sometimes I also like to do a breathing exercise. Yeah, my environment setup is I try to set up everything very clean. And what I also like to do is I always enjoy to have some water next to me so I can always hydrate. And yeah, that's it. I like to set up my
Awesome.
headphones so I'm not distracted. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's my personal flow framework. Exactly. So I will ask to the community, to the listeners, what of that has resonated mostly with you, and what do you take out of that? That's my personal tip. Thanks, Iris. Now I would love
Yeah.
to hear yours.
Awesome. So I guess I just want to focus on the top points, and I agree
Hmm.
with you on the first point. I think that having a clear goal, having a clear mission, having a clear purpose, these are tiered, but the bigger um, the North Star that you're looking towards, the bigger the intrinsic drive, the bigger the intrinsic motivator, the more primed you are for flow. And I think that that is the first and foremost foundation for flow, because you can have all the tips and tools in the world. But flow primarily happens when you're doing something that you absolutely love and you're totally engaged and engorged in the experience. And that can only be when it's something that's internally motivating for you,
Hmm.
not externally. So that would be like my first and biggest primary flow framework foundation. And then I would say the second big one for me is create your calendar, mm, create your prime time,
Hmm.
create your life, create your events, create your activities, create your perfect day. We tend to live, and I used to live in a life that was organized by everybody else. So my agenda, my day, my life was really, based on what I thought was the most important things, to do, which had to do with whatever other people were, interested in doing with me. So, we're going by our boss's schedule, and we're going by our partner's schedule, and we're going by our kids' schedule. And I think that reframing your mindset to saying that first, I create my schedule. What are my non-negotiables? What is my fundamental well-being day looks like? And then I can fit myself into everybody else's world in a much better place, because we think that by making ourselves available for our loved ones and our employers and our work community, we think that we're doing something good and we're making ourselves available for them. But really, what we're doing is we're giving our power away, we're giving our energy away, and we're not really we're not being, the best or the highest productive for others as well. So it's kind of like a defeating the purpose. So I would say these are the top two big stones for me: having clear path, clear motivation, clear purpose on why you're doing anything that you're doing, and then setting up your perfect day, your perfect calendar, and then you can fit in everybody else's stuff in your life.
Hmm. I like that. I like that.
And
Hmm.
I'd like to ask one final question, and we can
Hmm.
wrap it up with this. Can you just repeat for us the four pillars that you kind of started with in this talk, just so we have a final rundown of what were the four pillars of a flow that you
Okay.
started with.
Absolutely. So the four pillars, and I need to, of course, add that I didn't come up with these four pillars. It's just how the science, how it's declared by the science, specifically by the Flow Research Collective, which is the first pillars are distractions. That's the first pillar. Managing distractions. What is it that distracts you? What do you need to get rid of so that you actually get yourself into an environment that allows you to actually dive into flow? The next pillar is triggers, flow triggers. What are things that actually ease you into flow, right? And I think there's a big amount of triggers. I actually forgot exactly the exact amount that there are, but I think it's between 12 and 17, as far as I know. Maybe I'm wrong, but yes, so these are specific flow triggers that allow you to engage into flow much more easier. And then, or trigger for you to engage into the flow cycle. Then the third one is your flow proneness, which means what is, for example, your based on your chronotype. When is the moment during your day that you are mostly prone for flow, but also on the other side, proneness means like we are getting more flow prone the more we engage into flow. So it's just like a muscle that we train or a nerve that gets more susceptible to specific things, or to specific triggers, which means we can train our flow proneness, for example, through focused meditation, or other activities that get us easier into flow and that require our focus. So everything where our focus is required. And the fourth one is the so-called or is the flow cycle, which consists of four specific steps. It's the first one is the struggle phase, or four specific phases. The first one is the struggle phase. The second one, the release phase. The third one is the flow itself, or the flow experience itself. And the last one is the active recovery. And all of these phases do not need to happen exactly that order, but they are necessary for you to have a long-term flow experience over the like a long-term, or like a flow experience over a longer period of times, and always being able to engage again into the flow circle. So never skip the active recovery.
That is wonderful. Jan, it's been a real pleasure. Great
Thank you so
talking
much,
to
Iris.
you. And
Yes,
I'm happy that we got to share these thoughts, these ideas, this science, and so much more to come on flow. And I'm sure we're going to do another interesting
for
series,
sure,
a
for sure.
continuation, sharing more on the magic of flow.
Thanks, Iris. I also love it. Yes,
Thanks, Jan. This was
super.
fun.
Bye.
Bye.